Judging by the buzz in the room, conversations are taking place, which is what this day is all about. That's great. It's lovely to hear. What we want to do now in this session is to give you a few more provocations and then to bring out that conversation into the room so we can all engage in it together. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to the first on your list for this session. And we're going to start with Tom Hunt from ALERC. I'm going to ask each of the presenters to give a little biography of themselves rather than me trying to do it for them. Tom.
Thanks, Ray. Can everyone hear me at the back without use of the microphone? Brilliant. Okay, well, I'll just tell you what ALERC is very briefly, in case you don't know, the Association of Local Environmental Record Centres. So I'm here to represent most of the local record centres in the UK. My provocation is quite quick, really. Being involved in LRCs, you kind of get to see the story of BioBlitz records from start to finish, whatever the finish is. But I'm interested to know whether the BioBlitz itself is a means to an end, and if it is, what is that end? Is it something local? Is it something national? Is it a bigger picture? Or is it just an end to itself? Are we just happy that we've recorded some stuff on the day and engaged some people, and is that it?
That is it. Okay, thank you. Who are we going to go on to next? It's John. Next, John VanBreda.
That's good.
That's
fine.
Go ahead, John.
I'm John, and I work on iRecord, and I was also involved in the Garden BioBlitz this year. My provocation relates to translating the enthusiasm that the public bring to BioBlitzes into the future generation of recorders. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity there, but great difficulties in bringing people on and helping them to take the next step. One of the things I think is really important is that if people contribute a record to BioBlitz, that they feel that that record is valued and that record isn't just being thrown in a bin somewhere or left on a desk somewhere. But there are great difficulties with that because records from members of the public at BioBlitz are often low quality or have data quality issues. So does this mean that we have to have every single record collected as a BioBlitz accompanied by an expert, and therefore it's really the expert's record? Or can we put technological and sociological processes in place that help us to manage that so that records can come in and be valued from everybody who contributes at BioBlitz?
Lovely, thank you. And finally, Helen.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Helen Roy, and I work at the Biological Record Centre, which is part of the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, and I lead the zoological side of things at the Biological Record Centre. And so that is an amazingly privileged position of working with many, many different volunteer scheme organisers, national schemes and societies, and 70 to 80 different national schemes and societies that are all active to varying degrees. And the Biological Record Centre provides support to the volunteer community. I also, as a volunteer myself, lead the UK Ladybird Survey, and that's again a fantastic privilege to be involved with the UK Ladybird Survey. And we get involved with BioBlitzes as national experts, so to speak. And my provocation, I also have a passion, I should say, for science communication and citizen science, and embedding that within the kind of work that I do and my research within the Biological Record Centre. But my provocation would be, what contribution do BioBlitzes, which are often local and on one day, make to the bigger picture of long-term large-scale data sets? And also a little bit along the same lines as Tom was saying, and we've also heard this morning, where do BioBlitzes sit within citizen science? Is it just about engagement, or is there some real science questions that might be being asked by the collation of this data through BioBlitz? And are we, when there is a BioBlitz event, is it very clear and transparent to the people who are contributing, whether they be an amateur expert or whether they be a member of the public coming along? Is it really clear and transparent as to what they're contributing to in a bigger picture kind of way? And I guess that links as well to what John was saying in terms of the value of the records that they're collecting. So where do BioBlitzes sit within the spectrum of public engagement to true citizen science?
Thank you. So it's there for you to discuss now basically what's it all about, is it any use to the biological recording community, and how are we going to make better use of it? What do people feel? Over to you.
Sounds like we need training, lots more people on the ground that can do quality recording. That's what I think. How do we go about that? Is there a sort of support network that I can take to volunteers at my, where I work, and work on some sort of throughout the year, work on training so that we know that we've got people on the ground that can submit the more quality records that you're requiring.
Has anybody actually attempted to do training in the lead up to a BioBlitz that they've been involved in at all? Or considered that sort of approach?
So we've actually done for the Bristol BioBlitz, we've done small amounts of volunteer training where we've had some of our more experienced naturalists come in to do sessions with our less experienced volunteers around public engagement sessions and also bits of recording good practice as well, which actually were quite popular. We've only done it once, so I can't give a huge amount of feedback on that, but we have tried it, and it does seem to, well, the event itself ran quite well.
At our events in the North Pennines, we had volunteer bosses, for example, support the wider group. Obviously, we did have experts leading sessions as well, but in addition to that one expert, so that they're not just pressured by the whole group to answer questions for that one person, we had some volunteers with the wider group just to be able to answer questions and help, so that we're supporting their application and records.
In terms of knowledge and increasing knowledge, I was interested just in what John said in his publication actually about using technological processes to try and eliminate perhaps the need to check the quality of some of the data. I just wondered if, John, you could expand a little bit perhaps on that. That's probably
sure.
At the end of the process rather than beginning, but perhaps you could just say a bit more.
Yeah, so the thing that's in mind, but I'd love to hear other ideas, is that once a record is sitting in the system but in an unchecked state, there's something called the NBN Record Cleaner, which is a desktop application, but more importantly, it's a set of rules that we can apply to a record in order to, not to tell us that it's a bad record, but to tell us that it's an outlier or an interesting record, and therefore one that needs extra investigation. So we are putting in place processes where experts can trawl through the records very quickly and run these rules against the records, and it will flag up, this one is a new so in a new grid reference for that species, or it's outside the expected time of year for that species. So they can hone in on those records and perhaps go back to the recorder and ask for photographs or specimens. In the case of the BioBlitz, of course, the recorder may not be available because of the nature of the event. So there are lots of difficulties here, but I'm just really aware that you mentioned having experts at the event. I saw people in the Court 1 BioBlitzes who came to the event and they walked along, and the experts did the recording and they had a jolly walk out and they loved the event and it was kind of a nice chat. They didn't get involved in biological recording. They might have said, oh look, there's a fungus, and the expert went over and recorded it, but they still didn't really get involved in biological recording. But I want to see how can we turn the kind of enthusiasm that gets brought into BioBlitzes into something a bit more long term.
Sorry, I don't know if there's anybody else here at all, but two that we've run so far, we find them successful to sort of split up. So on the first sort of from 5 p.m. on the Friday evening up to sort of dark, we had all the experts in to blitz the place, and then on the Saturday we brought back the experts and they took the public with them and showed people what they'd found, so that already we got a load of nice records, but the public engagement of it is sort of separate. I don't know whether the press has done it that way or not, but we found that quite successful because we already knew from the previous evening where all the sort of most interesting things were. I don't know if that's the way to do it. And also I'd like to say about iSpot. I mean, I don't know, I'm a great believer in the iSpot idea, where most members of the public have some sort of camera or, you know, a smartphone or something at the moment, so I've always encouraged them if they see something, they don't know what it is, to take a picture. But some of the museums, certainly in Northern Ireland, aren't very accepting of the photographic idea. They're still looking for the expert opinion.
Sure.
So there's lots of difficult things there, so lots of things in there. I don't know what you think.
Jill.
I was just wondering how many members of the public actually really care about recording. I know that's an awful thing to say. How do we make them care? Most people are quite happy to go and say this is a woodlouse, this is a ladybird, and I don't think there's that many people who want to take it further.
People that are coming to a BioBlitz event, and that they'll all be coming for very different reasons and with different aspirations going away from the event. And I'm sort of mindful when I think about the idea that if any one of those people walk away feeling that they want to do more biological recording, I think about the Hoverfly recording scheme, and Stuart Ball, who runs that scheme, talks about how much data comes from very, very few people. So actually one person can make an enormous difference in terms of then going away and providing a lot of data. So I think that there is perhaps a tendency at BioBlitzes to just name things, and as John said, for an expert to go around and to say, yes, this is a 14-spot ladybird, this is something else, without any actual instructions to why it is the species that it is, and some more depth of engagement in that regard. And I think that's an important part of it.
Was on this table?
I think that's a BioBlitz, and from my limited experience, there are all sorts of levels of things going on. And one thing I did was to create a children's recording sheet, which was very simply asking 4 questions: who, what, where, and when. Because just to get the children to draw a picture of it or take a photograph of it and write those simple things down there might be the spark that sows a seed in the future. And I see that as a really important part of it, because anybody who's an adult who suddenly thinks, well, I want to record things, it takes absolutely years to become an expert naturalist and to know what you're looking at. And really, I think you can't expect that to happen from a BioBlitz just as a one-off with an adult, I don't think. But with a child, maybe, somebody who you could inspire on that one day, who then in the future becomes one of your local experts. I consider that as really important to provide those recording sheets for children, although not many of them are used, but even if it's one child that does that, I think that's important.
Thank you. I'd just like to comment actually briefly that in terms of training, I think very often the training that we should be aiming to do is not how to identify things, but we should be training already the people who are the experts into how to talk to people who are. That's the key issue. Yes.
Sorry, if I can follow on, because it was the same with BioBlitz, because Maggie's talked about children, but with the experts and the community, the experts really, like Mary said, went and did their own thing, but then we had our spots when they would take the public with them. And the ones who were willing to do that, the experts who you said, were actually very good, because then they talked about not just what it was, but why, and you could feel and how to identify. Certainly the botanists did a really, really good job. Inspired a lot of people, who actually to smell and look at the plants and actually how to go about identification. And that we got really good feedback from just having those set hours when the experts weren't just recording, they were talking to the public.
That's right.
I think submitting the data part of the event itself, then everybody's taking part in that rather than relying on people going away and having that emphasis on them. If you make it part of the event so everybody has a go at submitting the data and understands why it's important, how it fits in the bigger picture, I think would make it more likely to be taken up by more people, particularly with things like iRecord and iSpot now. It's easy for everybody to do. And if they've just had that little taster of it at the event, they're more likely, I think, to then go off and do it themselves.
As long as you can maintain the credibility of the evidence and of the event, so your experts want to come the next year, because by and large they're not being paid, and so you're relying on a bit of a social side. They're coming to talk to each other, and they're coming to, to pop on the network, and not just to engage with the general public.
So I think the point that was made about not being able to train somebody up to be an expert in Barclays, you can't do that in a day. From somebody with no knowledge. So we have to be realistic about what we can train people, where their starting position is, and what we might be able to raise their level of understanding to. And whilst I know there are little kind of smartphone apps which can help you to identify different bugs and different birds and so on. So those might be part of the solution that John's talking about. But even then, in a way, you're not training people, to the level of being able to actually identify an insect where you've got to take it away and dissect its genitalia, and do all of that stuff. So I think there are maybe two thoughts that I have. The first one is we've explored, we haven't done it very well, but we've explored making that process of identification visible within the BioBlitz, so that we've got a super duper insect guy called Ivan, who I'll talk about more later on. He kind of sits there with his microscope through the event, dissecting the genitalia of insects. And so to make that process visible is valuable, even though you can't. And we can do things with a microscope to make it visible and so on. But just the idea that actually this is how the process happens. That I think is a valuable bit of learning. And the other valuable bit of learning I think that we can bring out here, particularly for younger kids, but more generally, is the idea that naming things is important, and knowing what they are is important, but that, to my mind at least, the crucial thing is actually the interrelationships between them. And to know something is a 14-spot ladybird rather than a 12-spot ladybird is nice. If there is there a 12-spot ladybird? No. There you go, see? But to know what it does and how it interrelates with the rest of the ecology is actually the most important thing. And if you understand that, then that might bring you back down into a deeper understanding of some of the other stuff. So I think that we need to be clear about what we can achieve and how we can achieve it, rather than perhaps than trying to turn everybody into an international expert in 24 hours.
Yeah, and so building on that, it occurred to me that for all of us who started trying to become good field naturalists, the quantity of stuff you've got to get your head around is quite daunting. So I wondered if alongside doing sort of BioBlitz, you could perhaps have a number of target species. Okay, it might draw attention away from the broader look, but particularly for the kids and for the public who are perhaps not so good at identifying species, give them a number of target species which could be environmental indicators, and they could also be, as Don says, in some way related to one another and to the plant community that they're living in. And you could get some really interesting information there about the value of your habitat in a pure nature conservation way. You wouldn't want everyone doing that, because then it's not really BioBlitz anymore. You're not looking for the other, perhaps the rare species and things, but it might be a way of giving the public something that they can grasp, because they haven't got so much that they've got to get their heads around.
Was there someone behind the pillar? Yes, behind.
Yeah, I suppose I see BioBlitzes as being a springboard really for the public, and that maybe we need to get more local recording groups and organisations like RSPB and Wildlife Trust involved after the BioBlitz, so that there's, for the people who really do get their imagination sparked, they can go on and do other things, and that they've got sort of, I know for me, I met a guy who was into bees, and I've never really been interested in bees before, and I knew nothing about wildlife when we did our first BioBlitz.
And yet, because of his enthusiasm, I went on to learn about him. And now I'm not about him. But it took that sort of mentor before I actually, and it wasn't, you know, it wasn't going to happen at one BioBlitz. It's happened over 3 or 4 years.
Is there any way we can encourage, you know, the experts turning up at our BioBlitz really made it? You know, they were fabulous. They were there on show, showing the process as we were talking about down there. They were IDing and they were really, you know, we had aphids and experts, organised experts, you name it, they were there. Without them, we wouldn't have had such a good quality BioBlitz. How can we speak to the scientific and expert community to say, please join in? Because they must get requests left, right and centre from BioBlitz people. But without them, you know, it's a bit of a pretty poor affair. We really, you know, one of our things, we're going back now to start writing to them now for our next year's BioBlitz. And we're really crossing our fingers that they'll say yes. You know, because they get, you know, requests from left, right and centre. You know, is there some sort of network, or can we have a, you know, just, you know, through your sort of peer group networks, is there any way you can sort of begin to raise the profile of the importance of this stuff and the role that you, the experts, play in what we're trying to do?
Is that something local record centres could help?
Yeah, definitely. I think in my experience, the expertise that the local record centres have been able to acquire, whether it's for BioBlitzes or for any other work, especially community engagement work, is simply out of people's good nature because they're interested in their taxonomic group and they want other people to be interested in it. And they also recognise that there'll be a time when they can't be the expert, and so they need people to come through, and that's actually quite a strong motivator for people to do that. But obviously the more events there are, the more thinly spread these people are going to become, and you know, that's a simple supply and demand.
Yeah, it's trying to encourage more to come forward. You know, we know our sort of public experts. You know, there's those that the press go to, so you begin to recognise who your funny man is, or your. But it's just encouraging students, PhD students, stuff like that, to step forward and
I think
put their hat in the ring and say, look, I'm up for it for you.
There's a certain element of peer pressure. So if one expert is seen to be making themselves available and generating a lot of interest in that way, then somebody else may want to as well. But of course you have to remember that just because somebody's an expert doesn't mean that they either want to communicate or that they're a good communicator. And also some of the people putting themselves forward who are great communicators may not actually be that expert, and you're always going to have that problem.
And national?
Yeah, so I think as well it's about looking after that community of experts when they attend your event, and there being something for them about being at that event. And so, for example, I remember the first BioBlitz that I went to was the big one in London, and there was a whole marquee set up with microscopes and identification guides, and there were a huge number of experts, and it was fantastic to interact and to talk to those other experts and to go out with them as well and learn some things, so that, you know, I'm fairly niche on ladybirds, so it was great to go and learn about other groups as well and to have that sort of depth of understanding from the others, and that feeling that there was that call for the volunteers to be there and being really well looked after while they were at the event. So it was made very, very easy for them to be part of the event. So I think it's very much about valuing the volunteers, and also for them to understand about the data that's coming out from that event as well, or to understand what their aspirations might be for being involved with the event. And it might just be about communication, but it might be that they're looking for particular records, or it might be that you choose your site because it's going to be of particular interest to a group of experts who may not have been able to get to that site for one reason or another. So I think it's all about nurturing the volunteers.
Add value for the experts too.
And add value for them.
Yeah, they're
Well, I can see from what Helen's saying that there's value to the experts in attending BioBlitz in terms of expert-to-expert communication, and to some extent to come and see toys or to see new ideas, see what's going on, and to contribute records. But someone said at the back that the interaction between the experts and the non-expert attendees is a really important part of this, and I've seen it myself in other BioBlitzes. It's a really valuable thing, but are we kind of running on the fact that BioBlitz is kind of fairly new, still fairly exciting, we haven't quite yet kind of inundated the market and everybody's got bored of it? So experts are still willing to go out on a walk, talk to the public about botany or ladybirds or whatever, but maybe in 5 years' time we're going to see that they've just done that so many times, they're not seeing anything come back from it, they're not seeing any new recorders come out of it, they're not seeing any valuable records coming back that they could have just taken on their own. So I'm interested in how that need to be more than just an expert-to-expert meeting ground can be fulfilled in the long term.
I think that I'm not an expert, but I'm a communicator, and to me, just the joy of being with members of the public and being able to communicate and feel and see that spark is what keeps me going. But I love to meet the experts. So if a way you can kind of put the experts with the communicators and have them work together as a team, because then I think everybody benefits. But I don't. There are some experts who are brilliant communicators, but some experts would probably feel much happier if they had someone that they could, who is a communicator, enjoys communicating, that they could train up. Because I'll learn about anything. Put me in a room with someone who's an expert, and I will, with natural history, and I will try and learn everything I can. And then 2 minutes later, I'm not telling someone else as if I've learned it all my life, because that's what I enjoy doing. I enjoy communicating. So it's a way of liaising the experts with communicators and getting them to work together as a team to get more information out and to kind of draw people in. Does that make sense?
So just to come back on that, so you're suggesting that really kind of seeing the spark in someone is the real motivator?
Yeah, for me. It might not be for everyone, but for me, to see that spark. And if I can nurture or develop someone, I will. If someone is put in touch with me, I will quite happily do stuff with them. It'd be nice to know the people that come to BioBlitz, if they can have someone that they can be put in touch with.
Yeah, I think what I'm getting at is that seeing the spark is great, but you've got to see the thing after the spark as well. At least sometimes, at least 1 in 100 or something.
Yeah.
For it to become really motivating. But for me.
I'm just going to go 1, 2, please. So
local representatives often hold annual meetings or even more regular with their local recording community, which can be a really good kind of event to advertise BioBlitzes and to get the BioBlitz message across. We hold an annual meeting ourselves, and I've often advertised the BioBlitz event and so you can get more and more recorders on board to this kind of thing. So I think it's worth talking to your local representative about whether they're going to hold such an event like that, and maybe it's worth going along if you want to try and get the community on board.
Going back to the children, I think that, based on this year's experience in Bristol with the Bristol 99 event, I do think tick lists are a very good approach. Simply creating a list of what you expect, because what is very common is very important in ecological terms, whereas what is very rare is very unimportant in ecological terms. And if we've got a tick list, you can give it to a child and say, okay, these are what we expect, tick what you can find. Ask me what a brand looks like, ask me what an ant looks like, ask me what an ant looks like, and tick it off. It makes the recording simpler because you haven't got every time to write down all the details of everything. And if you can define it by geographical area, normally down 6 grid references a hectare, and identify the hectare you're in, and then have a tick list of that hectare, it gives you a lot of information actually about distribution and therefore about the significance of whatever the species are. And I was working on this quite a lot in the summer after the 1990 found very useful.
John, just very quickly come back on that. So I really agree, and I think that's a good example of how you can take the recording process and make it something where we don't actually have to just discard all the public records, because the tick list not only can be things that you know are attached, but you can choose easy to identify species that you can be confident or relatively confident that members of the public will be able to identify. And you can also repeat the same tick list year on year, so therefore get interesting data over trends and so on. So there's lots you can do with tick lists, and it solves a lot of issues, I think. But it doesn't solve the issue that then people forget to look for other things, but it still means that you can value every record.
I just also wanted to add, so I also agree that the tick list approach can be a fantastic approach for a selection of species for that particular event. But I also just wanted to build on the idea as well of the BioBlitz as being an opportunity to describe the tools that are out there for natural history recording, and having the, as somebody said, having the experts there actually using the keys and using microscopes and doing identification and showing that that's what it is all about to get to the depth of level of understanding that those people have. And also, so we've already heard mention of iSpot, and I think that is a fantastic resource for people to be able to go away and to be able to use it in their gardens or their walk to school or whatever to help them with identification. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity to promote the tools, whether they be basic keys and field study guides or whether they be iSpot and iRecord. There's the opportunity to give those tools to people.
So I was just wondering what leads an expert into becoming an expert, because we're talking about children coming to some of these events, and it's a very long term to know actually whether that child, because none of us ever follow that, whether that child has then become an expert in the future from something that has happened in their childhood. I think things don't necessarily change that much, so I suspect it might be worth asking some of these experts, saying Helen Roy became an expert in ladybirds, to see what drew her into it, because it's a kind of invisible thread from maybe that childhood. So I don't, Helen, what?
Should we start with that then?
Yeah, so I mean, I was 6 in the year of 1976 when it was phenomenally hot and there were a huge number of ladybirds around. And actually what captivated me about ladybirds at that time was their life cycle. So it was seeing them emerge from their pupal cases and watching their colour develop on our vegetable patch in the garden on the Isle of Wight. But I think that I just have a passion for natural history, and I just had a passion for the inquiry side of it. And I also had fantastic biology teachers at school who nurtured me and took me out into the field and made, as well, to be a girl in natural history at that time, I was the only one of the group that were going out, but I was treated as if that was perfectly normal and praised for it, I guess, so just encouraged.
So I suspect each of us personally here have that kind of story as well. So actually, if we're taking children out into these recording situations, you are making that, but you can't, as I say, see that thread until 20, 30 years on, so that would be very difficult to analyse.
But I think there was a lot about it being me on my own as well, and being satisfied to be on my own in the back garden, rooting through the vegetables and looking for the ladybirds. And I didn't need somebody alongside me to do that. I needed someone alongside me to show me the tools of how I could take that a bit further and how I could develop the skills. But a lot of it was about me working on my own with my Observer wildlife book and other things, and probably being quite a strange child.
Was there a point over here? No?
Martin Harvey from the iSpot project. I think with the emphasis on getting where the next lot of experts come from is great, and BioBlitzes clearly do play a role in that, even though it's quite hard to quantify. But I think that there's a wider issue as well, that we're not, with the best will in the world, going to convert everybody to become a really expert biological recorder. It is a somewhat niche occupation. But I think one thing that BioBlitzes do play a very important role, though, is in
getting support amongst the wider public for those people who do choose to be biological recorders. And I think that's quite important, both in terms of supporting things like local record centres that receive public funding, and also in terms of those people who do become specialist biological recorders actually feeling that they are not completely off from what the rest of the world is doing, but there is some contact between what the general public thinks is a good thing for people to be doing, even if they don't necessarily want to get involved at that level themselves.
I mean, one of the things I find, is that it's not necessarily about converting people to recording to species or subspecies level. It's getting the public to understand the big relationship. You know, what is this bat doing? Where is it? Why is it here? What does it need? What happens to that animal if something changes? You know, if you concrete over, all those things. Because if we don't get that message out there to the general public, they won't defend what they don't care about. And if they don't know about it, they can't care about it. Yes, there are, there are people that get inspired and get into recording and get into a level of detail that other people don't get into. But we can't exist on our own. We as a recorder, if you're a recorder or whatever you're doing, you don't exist in a vacuum. We exist in society. Getting BioBlitz is a way of engaging with wider society to give them the idea that perhaps they ought to care. Perhaps they ought to, so when they see something in the local paper, they just go, perhaps they ought to do something about it. Perhaps they ought to make their voice heard.
I think that's absolutely right. A question though I throw back to you is, how do we manage to keep this sustainable? How many BioBlitzes have taken place at one location, then moved on to another, and that's it? How can we show the public who come out to a BioBlitz that what's been talked about on that BioBlitz is how important this is to do monitoring and make sure things are there and looked after is actually effective? How do we evaluate that sort of thing? Should we be looking for BioBlitzes to revisit places or to have a bigger presence to show what that data has been used for?
Well, that's going back to the basic, what is the purpose of the BioBlitz? If the purpose of the BioBlitz is to do biological recording, it's the wrong tool. Because frankly, taking 40, 50 people on a bat walk is a really bad way of doing a bat survey.
But is that what BioBlitzes have become and not what they originally set out to be? BioBlitz originally set out to become a fun event where people who were recorders would spend 24 hours literally trying to build a great big table of species, a list of species, and see how many they could get. And they would be cheering because they got to 600 or something. And it was kind of fun. And I don't know whether it's happened in the States or not, but here we've turned it into something where it's become very much a public engagement thing. And as you say, rather than a bat walk going out to record bats where someone's actually trying to record bats, it's all about people learning what a bat detector is. They've never seen one before, so they'll get in a turn and go, wow, I can turn it down. It's making different noises. So it's perhaps we're actually taking BioBlitz somewhere slightly different to where it started.
I think we've struggled with this in Oxford. So we've run two, the first year we did it, we were very successful at recruiting experts, recruiting recorders, and we got lots of recorders along, and it was great from that point of view, but we didn't get many members of the public. And this year, and that gave us a problem funding-wise, again, coming back to funding, which is my primary concern at the moment. Because that was, nobody's going to fund a nice day out for 30 recorders, no matter how valuable the data that's generated is. There's no commercial sponsor out there for that kind of event. If you want to do that, you've got to get the public in. So the second year, we went for a public event. We much better. We got loads and loads of public, but we really missed the recorders. They weren't that motivated to come because by definition we put it in a public space, in a much more accessible public park that was much less interesting ecologically. And so this year we're going to swing the pendulum back again, and we're going to try and find the sweet spot in the middle of these two things. But I think we've got to accept that their intention, almost by definition, a space which is really good for public access, which is in the middle of where people live, rather, in the middle of a city or whatever, where lots of people have it on their doorstep and so on. These spaces are not going to be the most interesting ecological spaces as a rule. And the most interesting ecological spaces are going to, as a rule, be be more inaccessible and so on. And I think it comes back to what your BioBlitz is for. Each individual organisation will have its own motivations, its own funding constraints, its own set of rules that it has to work to.
Yeah, I was thinking, so I do feel the sense of the tension between what John describes with the BioBlitz as being a fun event of bringing together a group of people to gather a set of species list for that site, and then somewhere further away from that, it becoming a more corporate event, and it becoming, I think when you've got volunteers who are giving up their time, and it's against the sort of funding aspect is a difficult one. I think there is a huge tension there, and yeah, I think that the most important people to nurture are those volunteers who you're bringing in.
One of the other tensions has been through local representatives, I think, in areas. Do you want to say more about that?
Well, I just wanted to ask a question, really. In my experience, and I'm sure the experience of most record centres, there is this sort of dichotomy between having a broad public engagement exercise with people who are novice recorders at best, who may have not even recorded anything, and having an exercise whereby you take the experts to the most interesting part of the county. And that's definitely true. But I think if we push that too far, we can create a bit of a false dichotomy as well. There's a lot of people in between as well. And the Wildlife Trusts developed a narrative almost of what they thought a wildlife expert would be, or how you would get from point A, being a complete novice, to somebody who has a lot of multi-taxa expertise. And that was quite an interesting exercise, and hopefully they'll continue to develop that. But I think maybe the trick to get the most value out of BioBlitzes is not to focus at either end, but somewhere in the middle, where we can take people that we know are already interested, that we know will submit some records, that maybe have some expertise in one taxon group, and develop those people. And I think if we can do that, we may get a lot more value out of our BioBlitzes, rather than simply trying to swing pendulums from one end to the other, but to aim somewhere in the middle.
And the BioBlitz can give you a lot of profile, like a spring watch or an autumn watch, and you can go to a back walk pretty much whenever you like, however valuable they are. But certainly from my perspective, on a site that's maybe got 40,000 or 50,000 people coming to events over the course of the year, events of all different shapes and sizes, it allows the BioBlitz to be up there with the vintage rallies and auto tumbles and craft fairs. It gives it a profile that suits it very well.
So I think that the skill, which is something that the LRCs can be quite good at, and certainly when I was working for an LRC, we started to become quite good at that, is out of all those people coming to the high profile event, how can we recognise which ones are most likely to start or continue on their journey towards becoming prolific recorders, and which ones aren't. And obviously that doesn't mean that you just ignore the people who are only there for the day out. You can certainly provide something to those people, but it's about having the ability, the nous almost, to seek out those people who we think are perhaps already on the journey or somewhere on the journey, and focusing our attention on those people.
As a non-expert volunteer, I'd say that there could be a lot of
scope to make use of the non-expert volunteers such as students and sort of very sort of involved members of the public to sort of create a buffer between the two sides of the pendulum. So, like with Jill, I've done a lot of going around with experts and finding out, sort of identifying a few key things, and then when children are, there's 50 children and one expert, they're all running up, most of them are holding the same bug. And I've then learned that that's such and such a species, and I can tell that, and I wonder if, so there's a more involved volunteers that are non-experts could be used to create that buffer, freeing up the experts to go and do all of their, highly skilled identification. While those volunteers can be sort of more on the sort of public side. So I'm very comfortable talking with children about, very loose ideas such as, relationships between species and stuff. But I can't identify that. Hands up, I go, it's a beetle, that's as far as I can go. And I just wonder whether volunteers could use more wisely to do that, so to sort of free up both sides of that.
Okay, comments on that?
I mean, there are options to use both for the experts and also members of the public. I'm chairing a species working group for BioBlitz, which is the organisation for British zoos, London, Painting, Chester, etc. So there's lots of big zoos in it. At Beale Park, we use our experts we tend to run from early evening on Friday to early evening on Saturday. So we have the experts and volunteers and keen volunteers in for that evening. Then the following day, during the public hours, we have the public in, so we can actually get the best of both worlds. We can get the recording side of it done, and then we can also get the public involvement to show them what we're doing and to promote the BioBlitz for the zoos.
I'm just wondering whether there's actually a difficulty in actually saying what is an expert. Jill there said, I'm not an expert, but drop her in a river, she will find otter spring like it's coming out your ears. Does that make her an expert? I don't know. I mean, there is no definition. Are you an expert because you've got a degree? Clearly not. There are people out there who have no or little formal education, but have spent a lifetime building up information about things which frankly I don't care about. I couldn't get interested in if you try. But there are people that ditto. I go out and I give myself the freedom. If somebody says, "What bat was that?" I go, "I have no idea. It was a passing bat. It was on a mission. I couldn't identify it." And so does that make me a bat expert? Because because I give myself the freedom to say I have no idea which bat that was. So we mix these terms up, and I don't think we've ever got a definition of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable point, and perhaps actually one of the barriers to more people becoming whatever we might want to think of an expert is that their perception of what is an expert, and perhaps their perception that it's something that they cannot achieve, for instance. And I know that, for example, talking to John Twell at the Natural History Museum, he was saying that through some of the open projects they felt that some of the data hadn't come in because people didn't have the confidence to put their data in because they felt that they weren't expert enough. And so I think it is a very good point. And I think that for perhaps many of us can remember, I can remember as a child going out with a natural history group and feeling quite small in that group. I mean, I wasn't a small child, but in terms of worried about tripping up over some identification or making myself look foolish over it. And so that can kind of put a barrier into learning, where actually I think many of the people who know a lot about a particular group are very happy to have all the kinds of questions that someone may wish to throw at them about that group. And they're not necessarily thinking themselves as an expert separate to the others. And I think as well, the fact that someone can communicate and learn a lot about some species very quickly and communicate that does make you a so-called expert. So I think this term expert is a bit tricky.
Maybe we should just bin it then. As a resolution today, I'd certainly be happy to do that. We bin the word expert, maybe we go for more experienced or less experienced, because that's the truth, isn't it? That you're on a journey from the start of being somebody that's not very experienced in recording, but looking at taxonomy, using keys, identifying species, to somebody that is. Maybe we should just use those terms.
And actually, as a so-called expert, I guess, on ladybirds, I know how much I don't know, and it's a huge amount.
I think that's the key point, isn't it? You should be an expert only if someone else gives you that title. If you give it yourself and you use something
to some extent, I think, from looking at it from behind the scenes, what the journey of the record, there's a kind of an arbitrary division between expert and non-expert, and that, it depends on the record that you're submitting, which is obviously a record in that taxonomic group and not necessarily others. But it's whether your expertise status gives the verifier of the record something extra about you. They know that you're likely to be submitting a correct record. I think that's, you know, that's the division, isn't it? Whether you're someone who can submit a record of a harlequin ladybird without a photograph, and Helen will go tick, which she recently went across on some of mine. So I'm not an expert. And the other thing that was interesting to me about that was the notion that people are fearful of submitting records, but perhaps interested in submitting records. Helen was originally, and I've been in the same situation. I think actually I know that people from, you know, bee wars who I know personally are going to be verifying my bee records, and I'm not an expert on this, and I might be making mistakes. So there's kind of getting from that point of, okay, I won't submit a record. Well, I'm going to submit records and I'm going to make mistakes, but I don't want to annoy the verifiers, the experts who are going to have to trawl through my rubbish, to actually I'm starting to get okay at this. And there's that transition, isn't there? It's quite an interesting path, and people are at different points on that path in different taxonomic groups, but recently, like, people from bee wars will tick off my records now if they're on easy to identify species. And I'm thinking, great, they're starting to think I know a little bit about this. This is really good. So it's quite a nice, because I'm not an expert, I'm keep recording, I make lots of mistakes, but it's nice to see that progression, isn't it? When you start to you feel valued, you start to feel like your records are meaning something, and that you're not just being ignored, and you're not just putting your records in a pile somewhere and crossing them out.
And we all make mistakes. Yeah, I think that's where the museums as well come to play, where you can have a specimen that you can look back over and
you can re-identify or misidentified ones. Yes. We're nearly out of time. One more, perhaps.
I'm just curious about the context and the outcomes, because BioBlitzes are focusing on the records, and I think what would perhaps give another link, I'm wondering how many BioBlitz do this, is what happens to them afterwards, the analysis, and why are they valuable? And does that come in after the BioBlitz? What's happening post-BioBlitz to the public, the people we're trying to engage, to show that just collecting these records isn't just an end in itself? What happens to the science, the real science that comes afterwards, the analysis, why it's important, what's happening to it, why should they just collect records about what species? Because some people don't get it. And I think it's that next stage. How many BioBlitzes actually engage in that next stage?
Actually, with the Biological Record Centre, we recently had an exhibition at BBC Gardens World Live where we were trying to show that journey of a record, and we had a sort of theme of record, research, respond, and we took a few, because I think there's a lot about storytelling as well, which I know has been a theme throughout this meeting with natural history, and the story of an individual record when it goes up against as part of a large-scale, long-term data set. And we produced a few flyers showing some stories around the use of the data for looking at climate change, for instance, and invasive alien species, land use changes. So we have some PDF flyers. If anyone wanted to take a look at those, they'd be very welcome to take them and interpret them in their own way. I was actually going to just make I brought some of these guides along as well, from citizen science guides that we worked on the project, and it brings out some of the things that we talked about in terms of progression, in terms of the technology side of things. And I know that BioBlitzes are perhaps a bit different to citizen science, but anyway, they're there. But I think that storytelling about where a record goes is extremely important. People are fascinated to think that their record of a ladybird in their garden contributes to understanding of an alien invader and how it's affecting the ladybirds they might be seeing in their garden.
I mean, I think I need to draw that to a close now, but just to sum up, it sounds to me from the discussion that really there's a slight crisis of identity around BioBlitz, and we need to just bottom that out a bit more perhaps. Clearly, BioBlitz are a fantastic opportunity to promote nature conservation, engagement in the natural world. In terms of their real contribution to science, perhaps that's a bit iffy, but there's still some middle ground to be met there. We need to perhaps emphasise more how that information is utilised post-event. To me, perhaps we should just finally think about BioBlitzes as the coral reef for young taxonomists. That potentially there are young school children or potentially even post-undergraduate people who have gone through their degrees and still don't know much about real objects, real specimens I should say, real items, who some of those might manage to actually flourish in the coral reef and go out and swim in the deep waters and become fully fledged taxonomists and ecologists. So let's hope that we can somehow pick up on that and see that value reflected in what we do with the BioBlitzes. So could you please thank our three panellists, Helen, Tom,